Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So nice to have you all here. We'll be starting the event shortly. On behalf of Invigour Energy, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. We appreciate you taking your time off your busy schedule to join us today for this roundtable discussion in conjunction with our 7th anniversary campaign 3, Learn with the Subject Matter Experts. As the name suggests, joining me today, I have two of my very well-known and experienced experts that have been in the oil and gas industry for more than 40 years. We are both honored to have both of them here today. So we have David Lee and also Graeme Ray. And we are honored to have you both here today with us. How are you,
Terry.
David? Hi.
Morning, Terry, and welcome to everyone who's out there.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, how are you, Graeme? All right, okay. I think Graeme is on mute. All right, okay. Without further ado, let me introduce.
Sorry, guys. I was on mute. Sorry.
No problem. Welcome again, Graeme. It's an honor to have you here. All right, okay. Let me first introduce David Lee. So David Lee has been very good friends, and we used to work together. So David Lee has been in the industry for more than 50 years. He spent the first 27 years in Exxon, so he's been working as geophysical operators, and also working as surveillance engineers. And he then spent about the rest of his career in Shell. So he spent about 20 years working as a gas lift expert, helping Shell OU solving gas lift problem, and also working to train young engineers around the world. All right, okay. So next, I will also introduce Graeme. Graeme Ray, again, is very experienced oil and gas experts. So also have the very great experience to work with Graeme before. So Graeme has about 40 years of experience, and he was the former head of petroleum engineering and production technology advisor in Petrofac. And he was also the former head of biotechnology for Talisman. So Graeme has played many roles, including being a technical authorities in production technology, and he also been giving training courses. And lastly, I am Thierry B. I have about 20 years of oil and gas industry experience working in the oil and gas industry. I am also a chartered petroleum engineer. So I work in Shell, so Petronas, and consultancy company, and I've done projects mainly in Malaysia and also worldwide. I'm also a subject matter expert in integrated production modeling, well performance modeling, and gas lift. As the founder of Invigour Energy, I would like to take this opportunity to give a little background of Invigour Energy. Invigour Energy is an oil and gas consultancy established in 2015. We deliver integrated services, including consultancy, technology, and learning to help our clients with different needs in the oil and gas industry. Our strengths in delivering oil and gas solutions come from our expertise and vast experience in petroleum and reservoir engineering, production technology, and other subsurface disciplines. We have collaborated and delivered our services to various well-known oil and gas companies such as Anquest, Repsol, Hibiscus, Petronas, and several other companies across Malaysia and also worldwide. Before we begin, here is the roundtable discussion house rules. The audience will be mute, and you will have a chance to have interaction with us by using the raise hand features in Zoom. And please feel free to post any question that you have in the Q&A chat window, and we will pick up the question that you have and actually answer them during the Q&A sessions. So today the theme is invest in skills and also adopting new technology for oil and gas to beat skill gaps and also to reduce emissions. Since we will be covering 4 different topics today, and the first topic that we'll be covering is actually current challenges of skill gap. Globally, the oil and gas industry is undergoing a period of turbulence, unstable oil prices, changes to the regulatory landscapes, and geopolitical instability. To add to this, the workforce in the sector is aging. The skill gap is forever increasing, and there's really a real shortage of talents in the market. So now let me first ask the first questions to the speakers. In your opinions, what is causing the skill gap between the junior and the senior workforce or the petroleum engineers? So what are your thoughts, Graeme and David?
You want me to go first on that one? That's a really big question, but I think if you want to go to the root of that problem, it goes back to the 80s almost, like with 86 when there was the oil price crash. That's when, in my memory of that, like basically it was like it was the perfect storm. Yeah, with the oil price went down. People didn't want to join the industry. There was an extended period of low oil prices, so the operators were desperately trying to cut back. And at the same time, you also had the introduction of computational power. Yeah. Prior to that, everything, it'd take 2 or 3 days, like to do a set of lift curves. But then software programs like Prosper were on the market, and they weren't great, they weren't fantastic, user friendly, but they could generate some lift curves in a couple of hours. So there was a perception within the operators they didn't need as many engineers or skilled engineers, shall we say. And as well, around that time, they started laying off a lot of engineers. But at the same time, the service companies were hot on the next big idea, which was essentially integrated services, where they were offering everything. And in that process, they started poaching engineers from the operators. And you got the perfect storm, essentially. The operators, in some respects, I would contend, they gave up the right to operate almost. A lot of the operators, not all, I would stress, but a lot of them basically took a back seat and let the service companies do their business for them. And it wasn't until later on, as the oil price started going up, the operators started thinking, hang on, this isn't right. We're operators, and the essential difference being that they handle risk in a different way. Operator risk is different from service company risk. And they thought, how do we even peer review what the service companies are doing now? They didn't have the experience in-house. So they started trying to hire again, but there wasn't enough people, but they hired them from the set. So they poached them back from the service companies. Unfortunately, service companies don't train their people in the same way that operators do. They train them, they'll train an engineer to do reservoir simulation on one field, and it's the engineer will do that for the rest of his life. Whereas a major oil company will train someone to be a reservoir engineer that they can send anywhere in the world to do any job, basically, around any type of reservoir. So it was a fundamental difference, and that's kind of collapsed in on itself, I think, over the years.
Yeah, I do remember some of that, some of the things that you mentioned, because I joined during the times when there was actually a downturn of the oil price. Okay, so thanks, Graeme, for that offerings of your opinions, and let me quickly ask David.
I'm going to preface all of this with one point. And whenever I'm talking about, we're talking about engineers here, but we shouldn't forget the field people, the field technicians and the field engineers, and also the operators. They are the eyes, ears, and hands of the petroleum engineers in the office. So you cannot preface one without talking about the other. I've seen a lot over my time, and I'll move away agreeing with everything that Graeme said, but it's a very complex subject. One of the drivers behind this I see is the structure of our companies, both service companies and operating companies, has changed. We're now no longer run by engineers or geologists or geophysicists. We're run by Swiss bankers and financiers and HR and IT to some extent. So they've all got their axe to grind. And I'll just do some bullet points on what I feel are the issues now. We don't have continuity. We don't have a real changeover when people move on. Young engineers typically move on every 2 years. So each time an engineer moves on, he doesn't hand over, and there's a skill gap. So you go from 100% of knowledge to 60%, Then the next guy gets 60% of the 60%. Then the next person gets 60% of their 60%. And you can see where we're going. The knowledge handover is getting smaller and smaller. Mentorship. There's not a lot of mentorship. There's no succession planning on how position flows in relation to our field development plan. None of us look at the field development plan over time. You know, a field may be put online and it's going to run for 30 or 40 years. They don't look at it like that. Most of management work on a 90-day myopia. So they're looking at the 90-day plan for moving rigs around, production, selling cargoes, whatever it might be. So we don't look out at the long term. And that's my start. I could go on forever, but I think they're the major points that I've seen is succession planning, field development plan, continuity and changeover.
Excellent. I think both David and Graeme summarized the challenges and the rationales what we are having the skill gap at the moment. Okay, so excellent. So that's where we start. Okay, I think now we're gonna quickly do a short poll. So let me just read out the poll. What do you think is the main factor causing the skill gap in the oil and gas industry? Too rapid phase of digitalization, inadequate succession plannings for knowledge transfer, or loss of experience due to the aging workforce. So you got about 8 to 10 seconds, and we will announce, well, not announce, but we'll share the results very shortly. Okay, so let's look at this. So, okay, interestingly, I think a lot of people is saying that it's due to inadequate succession plannings, and I think that just really again emphasize what you just covered, David, and also Graeme. So it seems like a lot of people are recognizing that is the fundamental problems that's causing the skill gap. Okay, yeah, thank you for that excellent interactions.
I think it might have been appropriate almost there to have a fourth one, all of the above.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so a famous technology journalist, Jake Van Grove, actually wrote in his article that the average age of the workers in petroleum company is about 50 years old, among the oldest of any industry. Now, more than ever, with an increase in the number of experienced individuals retiring, the energy industry is facing a shortage of trainers capable of mentoring the next generations. So our second question for the session is, what can be done about the current challenges of the skill gap? And what are the ways to bridge and also to close the skill gap for the young graduates and also especially the young workforce to increase the technical competency? So yeah, Graeme and David, so what are your take in this area?
Well, I guess for me, yeah, I think we need to be careful here when we talk about the skills gap, yeah, and we talk about competency. All of these things are all tied up together, yeah. So we have to be very careful that we, when we say a skills gap, what specifically is that? Like, is it just is it something that the company wants in their defined competency progression? Yeah, or is it something that the engineer wants? He wants to get familiar with and be experienced on a particular area, and it may be a skills gap for him, but it's not for the company. The company don't care whether he knows about it or not. He's still a value asset in terms of what he can do. How do we increase that? I think we touched on this earlier. I honestly believe that mentoring is a key part of learning for young graduate engineers. Yeah, I don't think you can simply send them on a course. You can't just, all they end up with there is a piece of paper. They have to do the work. They have to be seen to do the work, and they have to be peer reviewed in the work that they do, so that they actually end up, so they can be confident that they're delivering quality work. Yeah. The problem with the mentoring perspective is it goes back to the first question, that there's not enough of us old guys left basically to do it. And the companies, when they're short of experienced people, they hire them in as consultants, and they tend to say, oh, and part of your job, part of your remit will be to mentor the young engineers and teach them what you're doing. Yeah. But the reality is you come in and you're the only engineer. Yeah. And the management want delivery of a project. They want an answer. Yeah. So you've got a choice. You can spend 2 days mentoring a young engineer to deliver a semi-okay, maybe okay piece of work, or you can spend 2 days and do the work yourself, present that to management, and they go, wow, that's a nice piece of work. Thanks very much, Graeme. Bye. Yeah. That's the choice that most consultants and most experienced engineers have now. They simply don't have the time to do both. There's not enough experienced engineers within the operators, A, doing the work, and B, mentoring the young engineers at the same time. So that's, to me, that's the problem. We're already there in terms of the problem, yeah, and we don't really have a solution because it's just getting worse with time. It's mentoring, though, I think, is the key to increasing technical competency.
Yes, I agree to that. I think, Graeme, me and you, we've been having so many discussions that, there's clearly a lack of mentoring platforms that is readily accessible to, to the graduates or the young engineers in general. Very good thought there. Let me ask David, what are your thoughts or observations?
Following on from Graeme, there's a couple of things is that I think one of the points is that there are a lot of us old guys out there who are willing to help, but the companies aren't willing to use our knowledge in whatever way might be the best way. There are a couple of things I see you can do. Bring back the field assignment, stop being, you're going to be in this job for 2 years. I know standing up the front of many classes, I would ask the class, what direction are you heading? And 96% of them put their hand up and said they wanted to be in the corner office telling everyone else to do the work. Now, if that's the attitude, you're not going to get very far. But Shell has a system where they designate people on a scale of knowledge as principal technical experts and subject matter experts. And these are people who, in their field, become the go-to knowledge person. Have PTEs and SMEs available to the people. Bring back field assignments. Look at the budget that you have before it comes up for being able to download knowledge or upskill your people to learn the roles that they have to do. Another way is senior pilot training. You don't have to send them to a training course. You bring in an old person, male or female, and you work up a process. We're going to do a field review for 2 weeks. Now, in those 2 weeks, that senior pilot then goes around and sits with each of the engineers while they do the field review and work up their wells, and then ask them, why did you do this? How are you doing that? Why are you going to do this? So that they're doing the work. The senior pilot is sitting there to grab the stick in case the plane starts to crash and gets them out of trouble. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, you have the field review for management. So what has happened is the people have gained knowledge, but you've also done 2 weeks of work to deliver product at the end of the 2 weeks. Each role should have a matrix. So each skill set should have a matrix of where you should be in that matrix after a certain amount of time. And if you want to go on the management ladder or the technical ladder. So have the two paths going. The ones who want to be managers, and the ones who want to be technical are aided in where they need to go with their skill set. Upskill the field people. Don't forget about them. They're aging faster than the people in the office are. We now have operators and technicians and engineers out there who have been out there for 30 or 40 years. When they go, who's going to swing the bells? Who's going to send in the data for your models? Who's going to give you the well tests? Who's going to give you all of this information? So we need to be careful. The skill gap is going to be heavily impacted by the continuity of our field people. End of my rant.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. I think I also agree that it seems to be a systematic lack or insufficient planning just on the successions and also the incoming and outgoing workforce. All right, okay, great. So so we have time for a quick question from the floor. I believe that we have a gentleman, Egmar, who would like to ask a question. I believe we can open the floor to his questions. Hello, Egmar. Are you able to turn on your mic?
We seem to have a technical issue.
Yeah, seems to be the case here.
Do you have his question?
No, I don't think so, actually. No, I don't think so. You know what? Maybe we revisit his questions in the next chapter. Okay, so we actually have got another questions by waiting for the audience. Let me just see that. Okay. All right. Okay. So the third question, the way we see it, right? Who is in charge and who should be taking care of solving these skill gaps? Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the operator. It's the operator's responsibility to ensure that his people are competent. That's the bottom line. He can't rely on the industry in general to supply him with experienced people. For too many years now, the operator have seen it as their God-given. It's not particularly the big operators, I would say, but certainly the moderate-sized operators have seen it as their God-given right, basically, to poach personnel from the service companies and deplete the experience levels within the service companies. I think the operator has to take responsibility for that, and they have to take some ownership of competency systems. Yeah, what I've seen over my time is that if you look at the majors like Shell, Petronas, Exxon, whatever, they're process-driven companies. They have processes that protect them from lack of competency. Yeah, so that allows them to have a process for developing people. People are not allowed to be in situations where their lack of competency can affect health and safety. Yeah, the moderate to small operators have tended to be driven as a competency-driven system. In other words, they hire competent people rather than having processes that protect them. They depend on having competent people. Yeah, so I guess operators have to decide which they are. Yeah, but there's not enough people in the industry. There's simply not enough people to poach anymore. Yeah, you can't go. You can't go and say, oh, I want a guy with 20 years experience. Like, I'll just go to the marketplace. You won't find them. Yeah, not unless you're prepared to pay the money. And most of the companies now, I find, are not prepared to pay that kind of money. And a lot of them have left the industry. So but it's definitely the operator. You are in charge of ensuring that your people are competent one way or another. whether you hire them as competent or you have a process that establishes their competency.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. The other thing is that if you have a system whereby you have subject matter experts within the organization, you keep things in-house. As Graeme said, the operator or the well owner is responsible for the knowledge. So the ultimate well owner is the operating company. And then as you go down the line, the management within that. So I would say the PTEs and the SMEs, and the next thing should be the people who hold the budget. Every time they look away from what their bread and butter is, they spend the money on things that will make heroes of certain people or certain departments. We tend not to look at what is the base business anymore. It's all about the bottom line. And if you have people who are in a position of power that are principal technical experts or subject matter experts and champions of a certain skill set, then they should be allowed to influence where the money is spent and how to get the right people.
Okay, excellent.
I just add to that, like something I was taught a long time ago in this business, like an asset manager told me, we're not in the business of making oil, we're actually in the business of managing risk. Yeah. And that's essentially true. Although we make oil as a byproduct, we're essentially in the business of managing risk. Yeah. And I think a lot of, certainly the small to medium-sized operators have lost sight of the fact that the skills gap is a corporate risk. Yeah. And they're not really addressing it properly from a risk management perspective. I think it's fair to say that the major operators, they have competency systems, they have processes. How well they're engaged with those processes, I guess, could be talked about, but at least they have them, they're doing something. The small to medium-sized companies, I think, don't fully recognize the risk. They're not managing that risk properly, I don't think.
I think on that, Graeme, too, is it used to be looked at in a one-time review at the end of the year.
Yeah.
It was never a peer review. It was just your boss telling you how badly you did. And the thing is, a lot of people go into those reviews and they get surprised. Now, if an engineer goes into a review on his competency and he's surprised, whose fault is it? It's the manager. It's the manager's fault.
Absolutely.
It should not be a surprise. It shows that the upper management's not interfacing with what the person who's doing the job is doing and is not ensuring that they are at a level of competency all the way through. Now, I know Shell's done away with competencies and Exxon's doing away with them as well in reviews. And it's supposed to be what is it? The industry at the moment looks at everything as a project. What we do as petroleum engineers is a process. It's a never-ending process. And it goes for as long as the life of the well, the life of the field, the life of whatever facility you're on. It's not a finite project.
Indeed, I will also agree with that. Yeah, again, it's sustainability we're trying to achieve here, right? We have actually two questions from the floor, I think. So maybe if we can just quickly answer the two questions, and that would be great. Yeah. So the first question is from our old friend Serge. So he's asking, for so many years since 2015, budget has been reducing, especially for the upstream market. The first thing that comes are things like training, recruitment, and tool sharpenings, competency management. Do you think the budget will come back again for the upstream to support the trainings and also perhaps getting additional funds? So will all the money just go into big tech, AI, machine learning, and so on? So that's the first question.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'll quickly go to that. I don't see it returning. As long as we have people who don't understand the base business controlling the money and controlling whatever it might be, for my 50 years, the first thing that went in the budget was training, and it just gets hit every single time. Earlier on, I mentioned about we have to do in-house training, almost like mentoring. So having senior people providing the continuity and teaching the people who are coming through, the young engineers, the young technicians, the young operators, why they do their job, how they do their job. You're only as good as your last visit to the field. And I think that's the only way it's going to go. Everyone's too focused on big tech, AI, MI, whatever it might be. And of course, I look at our industry as a vehicle, and it has a gearbox. Some of us have 3-speed gearboxes. Others have 8-speed Bentley automatic gearboxes that do everything you want. But at some time during the process, you are going to have to change gears and go back to accelerate over a heavy hill or heavy conditions. And that's not what we're doing. And the budgets, I believe, won't come back for training and things like that. We're too myopic in our view.
Yeah, I would totally agree on that one, Dave. I would like to think we're wrong, but I agree with you. I've seen the training budgets cut year after year. It seems to be the number one target for cutting budgets and cutting costs is, well, we don't need to train them anymore. Like, you know, the oil price is low. There's nowhere for them to go. They can't leave us, so we don't need to train them. You know, but given the cyclic nature of it, you mean that you're going to just wait until the oil price goes up again, and then everybody will want to hire them, but they won't be competent enough. It's just, it's a false logic somewhere in there. Like, you know, it doesn't, it feeds it. It's a snake feeding on itself, you know, yes. to justify the processes, the lack of process and the lack of risk management that they have. It truly is a false economy. And I would come back to the original point in terms of the number of engineers that were let go over time. Yeah, it does. Sometimes it just takes bodies. Yeah, bodies in a room to talk to young engineers and explain something to them. Yeah, when I realize the industry's changed and you know, looking backwards isn't the way to go. Like, but at the same time, when I joined my first company, yeah, we had 2 junior engineers, yeah, and there was 10 experienced engineers. That is to say, 10 engineers with over 5 years experience sitting in that department, yeah. At any one point, for any given day of the week, I would have a mentoring session with one of those engineers, yeah. It might be 1 hour, 2 hours. They would literally sit for hours and explain something to me. Yeah, it just doesn't happen anymore. There aren't enough engineers. They don't have the time. They will not sit. They cannot sit for 1 hour to 2 hours to explain something in detail to a young engineer. Yeah, to me, that was one of the most valuable experiences I had. Yeah. Plus, as well, you just went to your supervisor and said, "I'm going down to the Otis factory. You know, they're stripping down some safety valves. I'm going to take a trip down there today, like, and have a look at what they're doing." You'd say, "Yeah, go." Yeah, now it's like, well, oh, what other work? Oh, yeah, you got to finish. No, I need you here in the office. Yeah, it's it's basically what goes back to what Dave said, that it's the practical exposure. Yeah, you can teach anybody something with a piece of paper. Yeah. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they need to put their hands on the equipment. They need to see it. They need to know what they're talking about. Yeah. And that comes from mentoring and supervised offshore visits, you know, getting involved. Yeah. But to answer the question, no, I don't think the budgets are coming back. I'd like to think they would, but I don't think they are.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Serge. It's probably not the answer you wanted to hear. And also, a lot of this flips over into the anonymous question as well about what's HR's role. But I just want to go back to something here and tell you that my last period in the industry before I retired, I used to travel over 260 days a year and 300,000 kilometres a year to every operation around the world. And I would stay there for 2 to 3 weeks. And I would sit with the engineers. I would sit with the operators. I would sit with the technicians. We'd go through the work they were doing. And it was almost like an in-house training course. But at the end of those 2 or 3 weeks, we could go to management with recommendations that would make $260 million worth of extra oil. And that's the way we were able to get it done. Now, the team I was in, we were only a team of 4, so we were really struggling, but we made a lot of money over those years and we trained a lot of people. And I remember Thierry being one of them that was mentored by Jim and myself and
I was one of the lucky ones.
Yeah,
but one of the key aspects there, I mean, you say it yourself, Dave, was you were basically ring fenced to do that within the company. Yeah, you weren't being continually pulled off into other things. I mean, you may go somewhere like, and you're doing what you're doing, and somebody may come and ask you another question about something else that's happening on a different field or development. But essentially, you're ring fenced to that.
We used to have to answer questions from when, as soon as they saw us in town, we had people from all disciplines would come and ask us, and we would provide the time. But anyway, I think that's answered the questions. As far as HR, they need to be given a brief on how they should treat engineers and given a plan, because they don't know. And if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah. Let me just read out the question just in case some of the people don't actually get to see the questions. So the second question was actually on HR, just on how HR can play a role in providing support to young engineers and especially in making a decision quite early in the career, whether they should be going into managerial or technical role, and also how would HR be able to close or just play a role in closing the gap, the skill gap in this context.
I think a lot of it, young engineers. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question in the sense that when I started out in the business, I think most people do when they start, they perceive they'd like to be a manager, they'd like to be a CEO or whatever, they'd like to be in charge of people and what have you. But it doesn't take long. Like once you've been in it for 2 or 3 years, you find an area that you enjoy, you like, you find that, or you believe you're adding value to it. And a lot of people change track and they go, actually, I quite enjoy the technical. I'd like to stay technical. So it's important that companies recognize that, allow them to become technical experts and allow them a technical progression where they're rewarded and recognized by the company on the same basis as field managers and supervisors and OIMs and all the rest of it. You don't have to be a manager to add value. Now, I'm not saying that managers don't add value. A good manager can, but a lot of people simply don't have that ambition, and lack of ambition is not necessarily a bad thing. Although somebody once told me that if you're not moving up, you're blocking the way for somebody else. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think as you get more experienced and technically good, I don't think there's any reason why companies can't move those people to the side, but still recognizing their value in that sense. If you've got young engineers and they have the skill sets for management and they're potentially good managers, it doesn't matter if they're younger than the engineers. I don't care if I've got a 30-year-old boss. It doesn't bother me. Yeah, and it shouldn't bother anybody. If I'm confident enough of my knowledge and my skills, but there's a 30-year-old there with much better management skills than me, that's okay. As long as I can rely on that manager to come to me if he wants a technical answer, but it's up to him to make his decisions and to stand by them, so.
Yeah, the short answer should be that every company should look at having a technical ladder as well as a management ladder.
Yep, that's it.
And recognise that you don't have to have a petroleum engineering degree to go on that ladder. You can find someone in the field who's a technician who has the ability and to do all the roles that a petroleum engineer would normally do.
Yeah.
And once HR recognizes that and builds that into the system, you will be a better company, and you will. That's where I went. I was put on a technical ladder by Exxon, and they told me this is the way you're going to go. Your pay and your status will keep equal with your peers who are now managers, but you will move up in parallel the more experienced you become, but you are a technical person only. And you end up having more power. I remember I was very quickly, I was at a presentation or an opening of something in a country. I won't say too much. And the big boss of Shell was there, the big boss. He was there for the grand opening. And we ended up bumping into one another and chatting because we were in the same building back in the Netherlands. And he said, "Oh, you're the gas lift guy, aren't you, David?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, why can't we ever get our gas lift right?" And my answer to him, and because I was at my level as a technical expert, I could talk to him like this. And I said, "Well, do you really want to know?" And he said, "Yes, you've got 5 minutes." I said, "That's your problem." And when I got back to the Netherlands, I got called up to the big boss's office for a 2-hour talk on what was wrong with it. He found the time to listen. But if you've got a boss who only says you've got 5 minutes, I've got to go to a meeting, it's never going to happen. Okay.
Indeed, that's very true. I guess that is also one of the challenges that the young people are facing these days. They're quite eager, lots of passion to learn, but really there's not much of a, mentor or coaches, around that's readily available to help them out. Okay, so I think that I would like to conclude these sessions for the first topics. In conclusion, I think that to address skill gaps and also create a flexible and affordable professional development plan in today's energy industry, it's really, I think everyone will have to play, their part. I think Graeme already mentioned, it should be the operators and also, it could also be that maybe the training institutions or maybe the government could also need to play a role in that. Okay, so let's close the first topics and let's move on to the second topics, which is on value creations for oil and gas industry. The first question I would like to start asking is there any way to scale up to deliver value creation, such as delivering new technologies, projects, and workflows? And if that is, how would we make people work more efficiently and more effectively? Any thoughts, Thierry, Graeme?
I think you have to be. I'm not a Luddite by any stretch of the imagination. I do believe that there is value creation in new technologies and new processes, but I also think that you have to be very careful how you introduce the. As I say, I saw that firsthand in the 80s, where when software itself, I mean, just the basic software was coming in, yeah. It didn't take long before young engineers were no longer actually conversant with the underlying fundamental principles of that software. And yes, they could produce some good work on the software, but they couldn't really, how should we put it, peer review it. Yeah, they couldn't really sense check whether the answers they were getting were truly viable. Yeah, they looked right, okay, that's fine, onward again. But then they couldn't look under the bonnet and go, well, hang on, it's using a correlation for Duns and Ross, say, and it's like, well, Duns and Ross is based on water wells. These aren't water wells. How good a correlation is it? Just because I got a match on one point. Yeah, it's things like that, things of that nature. So I don't think new technologies are specifically the way to go. Yeah, but I think we should always be open to new technologies, etc. You don't really get more efficient simply by making people work faster. Yeah, I don't believe people are inherently lazy in that sense. I don't believe anybody goes into work in the morning and goes like, today I'm going to do a bad job. I've decided today's the day I'm going to do a bad job. Yeah, everybody gets up in the, I think most people get up in the morning anyway and decide they want to do a good job. Yeah, so if you give them the tools, yeah, and you give them the processes, most people will do a good job. So I think you just have to apply those technology appropriately. You have to risk them coming in. You know, is there value creation for the company in these new technologies? If not, then, you know, do it the old way. It doesn't, you know, whatever creates value within the company, not necessarily new technologies.
I have to agree with that. A couple of things is I'll go back to my 3-speed or 8-speed gearbox. You know, we have a lot of 1-speed wells out there. The world is full of wells that are poor. They will never get money spent on them. They are in inhospitable places where people want to kill you or blow you up or steal anything you put on them. So they're never going to get to see the technology. We have a thing in the industry where the top 80% of our wells are never looked at. We produce most of our oil from the top 20% of our wells. Really? If you haven't looked at the other 80% of your wells for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, how do you know they're not in the top 20%? So you have to have the tools to be able to do that. The other side of the coin is the companies that provide the technology, who do they send in to sell you the technology? They send in a salesman. They're in business to make a profit, exactly the same as the oil company is. The problem is that we as an industry have screwed service companies down so far on wanting a deal, wanting the cheapest. You can't charge us that for this. I want the lowest. So what do? They deliver us the bare minimum. They then try and sell us what they say we want. Oh, you want this, you want this, you want this. No, you need to be in a position to say, this is what I need to deliver my end point. So you need to know the subject. There are absolutely wonderful new technologies out there that will work in most cases, but in a lot of cases, they will never see the light of day because our conditions in the desert or in the jungle or at sea will not allow it. We also now have greater regulation on health and safety. You know, you've got various zones that certain equipment is not allowed into. So to get through the various permissions to be able to bring that equipment in, we have contract departments who are pushing, no, you can't have that in the contract because we don't allow it. They know nothing about this piece of kit. It's a couple of red and green lights as far as they're concerned, but they say no and they have the final say. No, that's not the case. The end user should have the final say. This is what I need. This is what I want. And if you can deliver that, that is the way we're going to get value creation from new technologies. I'll probably bring it up at a later point in this discussion as well, that when we get delivered a new technology, we have to start getting the technology companies and the technology providers to make sure that they're not like, I have a thing about Apple. I will never have an Apple product. To me, they're software and hardware bullies. You have to use their equipment. It's wonderful stuff. But if you're a bully and you won't allow me to interface with something else, then you're of no use to me. Okay, I might be a dinosaur. But we have to understand that if we have Prosper and we have Wellflow and we have Wingloo, we need to be able to say, I want my Wingloo to be able to export IPR files to my surface model, which might be a different set of software altogether. So we need to be able to allow our software to plug and play with other softwares so that we're not tied to the development. What if that company goes under and then we've lost everything that's upstream of it? So we need to be able to force a continuity within the new tools that we get.
But doesn't that to some extent contradiction to what you were saying earlier in terms of traditionally the operators have bullied the service companies to a point now where they look to make money out of basically everything. It's all the hidden charges, like, you know, the run and hold charges, the depth charges, you know, the showing up for work charge, the tying my shoelaces charge, you know, all of those things, like, you know, but in a lot of ways that's primarily been driven by the operator who has never who never stopped to really think about the profit margins of the service company.
Exactly. And so we've created our own bullies. Who becomes the next bully?
Yeah,
the person who was bullied.
But I mean, you make an interesting point, because I remember one of the first wells that I worked on when I went to Brunei, we ran fiber optics. It was one of the first fiber optic wells, I think, globally, and it was wonderful. It was an injection well. I mean, basically, we were getting temperature profiles right along this well bore, seeing what was happening, we were getting this masses and masses of data. Yeah, it was wonderful until we realized that we couldn't actually analyze it because there wasn't any software in the marketplace to actually analyze all this vast quantity of data. So who got the job? Oh, the service company that ran the fiber optics had to go off and develop the software so we could actually look at it. And it was like, what's wrong with this picture?
They had the software all along, and that became part of the contract that we'll collect. You can collect the data, but we're the ones who have to sell you the way to analyze it.
Well,
and you're never allowed to see it. So
that's right. So
they're all guilty, but we need to get back to a relationship whereby that the people who are delivering, and there are a few small companies out there who do this, but given a couple of years, as soon as they're successful, they get sucked into big blue or big red or big green or big orange or big purple, and they just become part of the mincemeat that you get fed.
But I remember when I first started in the business, the company that I worked for, part of their tender evaluation was that the service company, whoever won the tender, had to have a minimum of a profit margin. They had to state what their profit margin was in the quote, and if it was less than a certain percentage, they were disqualified, because the company took the view that if they didn't make a profit, they weren't going to be in business for the next, as Dave said, like for the next 5-10 years. They wanted companies that were going to grow and basically support their business. So, I mean, you could take that too far. You could basically legislating for how companies do their business to some extent. But I think there was some value in that approach. You cannot simply strip the service companies of all of their profits. They're not investing in research. Then they're not bringing the value to the business that they are capable of bringing, because all they're really doing is simply trying to survive.
Indeed, yeah. I think it's fair to say that we all have to look out for each other, right? Both operator and service provider, for long-term sustainability. All right, okay. I would like to move on to the next poll, if that's okay. So we've got a poll coming up. The question is, what are the determinants for value creation in the oil and gas industry? Cost efficiency, productions, or investment efficiency? Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, I was too slow, but I was going to say that as well.
All right. Okay. That's quite quite interesting to hear that it's coming through it's quite strongly. Okay. Yeah. So what is your view on that? I think let me start. I think it's quite easy to say that we have to invest more, more better. But again, there's so much decision making along the investment process, and very often it's quite complex. Yeah. All right.
Can I just say one thing about that response?
Yeah.
For all those people who gave that response, so the answer to your question is, if you really feel, well, you may not agree with it, but let's say a lot of people do. So here's the devil in the details. So let's get rid of all of our production, right? And then you don't have to worry about spending money on production or wells or platforms or anything like that. So just invest in anything. Okay, so let's get rid of oil and gas and all of our facilities altogether, because that's what you're saying by saying, no, value creation doesn't come from production. Well, it's like an airline saying, oh, look, you know what holds up our planes all the time? It's passengers and luggage. So let's get rid of all the passengers and let's get rid of all the luggage. So therefore we won't have any more problems.
Yeah, but at the same time, I guess there's two sides to that story. Like, because at the end of the day, you have to make a profit, so you have to make a minimum return on your investment. Yeah. But again, I think that's one of the areas where you've got the difference between the majors and the small to medium size operators. The majors have really large portfolios. So basically they balance their risk by knowing full well that they may make 5% or 10% on one development. Yeah, but they may make 80 or 90% on another development. Yeah, so overall they'll make their P50. But for the smaller to medium sized companies, they need to make their 60 or 70%. Yeah, they need to make their P60 or P70 to stay in business. Yeah, so it's not quite the same for all of the companies, and you can't legislate or generalize across the whole business. Yeah, there is a big difference in the way that the majors and the small companies manage their risk and manage their investment risk.
Okay, we've just been told to hurry up. We're running out of time.
Okay.
So,
all right. Okay. I think there's lots of passions and in the topics that we discussed today. Okay. I think let's turn things. Let's turn up the gear a little bit, and we're going to go into rapid rounds, fire rounds of questions, and so we are halfway through the talk. Okay, so I believe that we're gonna have a quick promotional videos coming up, and after we go swiftly into the rapid round. Go ahead. yeah, thank you, the team, for fantastic videos. So we're gonna move into the rapid fire round sessions. So before we start, just want to remind both David and Graeme again, it's a very swift yes or no answer, and maybe just a very short, comments on the response. All right, so the first question, would you call a skill gap a pay gap?
No.
Both.
Both, okay, yeah, okay. Any reason? Any comments? Just one sentence?
I think the skill gap has become a pay gap. I think a lot of companies deliberately don't allow their engineers to close competency gaps so that they don't have to pay them more. Yeah, and I think a lot of companies now are actually withholding competency in order to keep the salaries down. And I think that's totally wrong. If somebody's competent, you shouldn't hold them back. You should be paying them what they're worth.
Yeah, that's more than one sentence.
Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, all right. Okay, David, do you have any things you want to add, but just one sentence?
If you don't know what their skill level is, you can't affect their pay.
Yeah, indeed, very true. All right, so second question. The next rapid, so is this the job you dreamed of when you were a child? Very, very deep questions.
No.
Or very personal.
No.
No.
All right, okay. Right, third question. Do you ever procrastinate during work?
All the time. All the time.
No, I call it thinking time.
Well, I call it that too.
All right, okay. Next question is, digitalization is a necessity and not a choice in today's oil and gas industry. Yes or no?
No.
No.
Okay, I'm not going to ask why. Okay. All right, okay, so that is the rapid round questions, and we're going to start the third topics, which is around the digitalizations. So this is saying that goes, digitalization is the key to the new dawn of oil and gas. First question, how does the oil and gas industry intersect?
Lost your sound. We've lost your sound, Thierry. I can't hear you. I've lost your sound, Thierry. I don't know if you can hear me.
So while Terry's trying to get his sound back.
Oh yeah. Okay, so you're on there. Are you? That's fine. Then.
Yep.
Maybe we just continue the discussion until he gets his.
Yeah.
So how does the oil and gas industry intersect with current technology industry? I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think that may be around things like I saw something earlier. Somebody was talking about drones and stuff like that. And I think I guess it did strike me at the time that when I saw the bit on drones. I think drones have become a very significant part of current technology, and we're going to see their deployment a lot further within the industry. I think robotics as well. So yes, I think the oil and gas industry has always been, always had its eye open on the main chance in terms of deploying current technologies, whatever that might be. Things like expandable screens, smart well technologies, horizontal. There's a whole array of technologies that the oil and gas, they're not slow. If they see something and they think that there may be an application in the industry, they'll go after it if they think it will give them a commercial advantage.
Yeah, I tend to think a lot of companies, the major companies, tend to make it a little too difficult for some of these, shall we say, technologies that's starting to show now, because we have a lot of startups and small companies that are coming up with some really cool stuff, but they just do not have the weight or the ability to knock on the door and get into a chance to be able to develop the technology by showing the companies what they can do. So sometimes I believe the oil and gas industry has become a bit paranoid about security, and possibly rightly so, made it too hard to be able to fit into their software parameters and their IT parameters. So therefore, it can be a bit of a challenge, and we may miss some opportunities with some really good stuff out there.
I think in general, like, I think the new technologies, by definition, they're breaking the mold, and you're not going to get that from the old big service companies. It's going to be small, nimble companies that are coming up with ideas that, and I think, to be fair, I think that's an area that the majors are quite good at in terms of seeing a technology, not necessarily the company, but the technology, and then supporting it through development. Obviously, the smaller companies, they can't afford to be guinea pigs, essentially, like, so that they tend to lag behind and latch on once the technology's been proven.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I find in a lot of companies, when someone goes in to meet someone, they're not meeting with someone who's at a level high enough. And the first two questions always made me blush. And I felt they were embarrassing for a major company to ask these two questions. Firstly, how much does it cost? And the next one is, where have you run this before?
Always. Where has it been run before? Yes.
Yeah.
Always.
And if these people are starting out, if you're driven by cost, it means you have no eye on value. And where has it been run before? Well, somebody's got to start somewhere. Yeah.
Are you back with us, Thierry?
Yes, so sorry about the...
no, that's right.
Yeah, can you hear me properly?
Yeah,
now?
I can hear you fine now.
All good.
Okay, so sorry about that, yeah. Well, problem does happen.
So I think we answered the question for you.
Yeah.
Excellent, yeah. Okay, so let's go into another poll. Okay, so the question is, what are the emerging technology in the oil and gas industry currently? First is drones, IoT, big data analytics, electronics and monitoring.
I would probably say that.
Oh wow! Okay, it's quite
Quite balanced.
Balanced, yeah.
I think they all have their place. I think. I mean, they all have applications somewhere within the oil business. I guess it's just a question of how you approach it in what areas of expertise. I do think there's an awful lot of when we talk about big data analytics. I've seen a lot of that neural network, the AI stuff. I'm not totally convinced that it's the way forward for a lot of the industry. Yeah, I think all we're doing is collecting a whole load of data, and nobody's really doing it. It's become a research exercise, yeah, for universities and service companies, and it's not really adding value. I mean, for most of my career, I've been involved in areas where I've had to do value of information exercises, yeah. And if it doesn't pay for itself, then you shouldn't run it. And that applies to downhole gauges. I love downhole gauges, and I would run them in every well if I could, if I was allowed to. But I still think every development should do a value of information exercise. They should justify running downhole gauges. You should, what's the point in having downhole gauges that allow you to optimize your gas lift in real time, but then you don't run automatic gas lift valves on surface in order to adjust your gas lift. Yeah, it's not about the data itself. It's about what you do with that data in order to create value. So it's not just about big data analytics for itself, for its own purposes.
Yeah, I believe it's a whole new subject.
Yeah.
As far as on a lot of these things, and we could go on for hours on this. Yeah. I see the value in all of these, but the other thing is that it all depends on your operation, the area of operation, how difficult it is, and how much money the company is prepared to throw at it, because it's their new jewel in the crown. Are they going to throw this money at a 60-year-old platform with 60-year-old wells? Are they going to stick this stuff out in the jungle where it's going to get stolen or blown up? This sort of thing. Yeah. And I think that's the way we have to look at it. It's strokes for folks. And as I'm trying to think of a nice, no, I can't think of a nice way of saying, you know, you can't polish.
I can finish that one in my head.
Yes, I think, and no matter how much you polish it, it's still a, yeah. All right.
All right. Okay.
Moving on rapidly.
All right. Okay. So I think maybe we can have just one more question for these topics, and I think the question is, how can we make digitalizations happening much quicker for oil and gas? Any thoughts?
I'm not sure we want to. I think you have to be very careful when you start allowing machines to start making decisions, then you're into dangerous territory, and you have to be absolutely 100% sure that they're making the right decisions. There's always the potential for human error. I accept that. But if you've got a computer that's making a decision based on artificial intelligence, if it makes the wrong decision once, it'll keep making the wrong decision. Yeah, it won't just do it once, it'll do it 10 or 100 times. Human being will learn from their mistakes. The computer won't necessarily do that. So you have to be really careful when you introduce these things, especially in a production environment.
Yeah, I think the people who are working at that end probably need to understand the business more and understand the end product we're after.
Yeah.
And they need to understand, you know, possibly how simple the start point of data and information is. So we need to make people recognize, to make this faster, is that there are certain things that we measure in relation to our wells, whether they be oil, gas, condensate, whatever. There are certain things we measure, and that's the key word, measure. We don't model them, we don't calculate them, we measure them. So if we measure 4 or 5 things that then flow on to everything else, they are the things you should concentrate on to move through the rest of the chain. And what I've always said is the one thing we have never been able to do properly, where does all of our information come from? It comes from the humble well test. It tells us how much we've taken out of the reservoir. It tells us how much may be left in the reservoir. It tells me how much I've pushed down the pipeline. It tells me how much I've produced. And those numbers, once you get that number right, you can then calibrate your model. You can then calibrate your surface model. You can calibrate your reservoir model. But if you can't get your well test right, you're just going to continually compound those errors through every smart piece of digitalization till the end of time. So if the people who build this stuff understand what we're trying to achieve and how simple the starting point is, but these guys aren't like that. They're trying to be really, really smart and really, really good, and they wanted to make it their digitalization tool to make your cup of tea, to wake you up in the morning, to make your bed after you've gone to work, whatever it might be. don't need that, just need you to get the well test right and feed into everything else.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, I think people sometimes lose sight of those fundamentals. There is absolutely no substitute for good surface well test data.
Yep. Measured.
Regular,
Measured.
Consistent well test data.
Yeah, representative.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna close off the this topic. I'm gonna move on to the fourth topic, which is on energy transitions. Yeah. So there's been a lot of talks about energy transitions and a lot of a lot of hypes, vibes, a lot of a lot of attentions given to this area. And so we look at the themes that have been discussed by the oil and gas executives, on environment, on climate change, energy transitions, carbon emission. They're all high up in the agenda. The oil and gas industry is facing increasingly demands to clarify, what are their plans for energy transitions, how that will change their operations and just, what sort of new business model they will have to come up with, to fit in, the long-term aspiration to transitions. Okay, the first question is energy transition the end of oil and gas?
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
No, I agree. No.
Yeah. Any way you look at it, yeah. I mean, it's like any resource, yeah. Oil and gas is finite. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it since the 60s in terms of peak oil and all the rest of it, like, which hasn't materialized, and we've found more and all the rest of it. But yes, it is a finite resource, and eventually we will run out of oil and gas. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, the only renewable energy resource we've got is nuclear, but nobody wants that in their backyard. But I do believe eventually that's where the world will have to go, is to nuclear. But oil and gas will always be needed, even if it's not for an energy source, but as a byproduct source in terms of, the other products that are made from oil and gas. I don't believe that transition can happen nearly as quickly as a lot of proponents for greener energy would like. Yeah, I don't believe that green energy is necessarily as green as a lot of people would claim. Yeah, I think the oil and gas energy industry probably should have recognized or woken up to the issues of carbon, CO2 and climate change a lot sooner than they did, and that the politicians of the world should have addressed that a lot sooner. We will transition. We will have to transition. There is no question of that. I just don't think it's feasible to expect it to transition at the rate that a lot of people would like. I think that's just the reality. That's maybe I'm being cynical, but I just think that's the reality.
Yeah, I think there's too many unknowns. We have to remember that we have billions of people who will never be able to live without coal.
Yeah.
That we know of at the moment. Yeah. They're never going to get the infrastructure. They're never going to get power lines. They're never going to get solar. And we're talking billions of the world's population. So it's not something that's just going to go away overnight.
Yeah.
And that is always going to be, whether it become a lesser market, but I don't think it is, because population is growing in certain areas, and people who are developing or disadvantaged will be disadvantaged for a lot longer than we would like, any of us would like. Yes, we're going to run out of things. Yes, we need to work on changing things. And if we always hear the voices of the people who, well, they call them the super glue crowd. These people who super glue themselves to roads or bridges or whatever it might be, and they're only talking about one thing. But that's the media that gives them the oxygen and the airtime. We never see what's really going on in the background in a lot of these major oil companies, major energy companies, and other countries that are using other forms of alternatives to oil and gas. And until we can actually start that focus for the average person in the street to see what is really being done, you know, what can be done, what is being done, and it's not all possibly as much doom and gloom. So immediately, you know, eventually there is something going to be done. You know, are we planting more mangroves around the world? Yes, mangroves capture 4 times carbon than an ordinary tree. Seagrasses, they're trying to develop seagrasses. They capture 12 times more carbon. But I can remember, well, it's now close to 2 decades ago, we were heavily into carbon capture technologies and projects in Shell. And Shell walked away from it because the people who were wanting to help capture the carbon were charging too much. And it was just wasn't viable. It was going to be, and the people who were going to work with that project were making it so expensive that people walked away from it for whatever reason. So there's always going to be the profit makers who are going to make these things difficult. But the answer, no, it's.
I mean, my take, if you look at the oil and gas industry as a whole, yeah, there's a lot of, shall we put it, decrying, devil making of the oil and gas industry. And yes, they have a lot to answer for, if you like, in terms of social costs around oil and gas and the oil and gas production. But if you look back, yeah, the first diesel or petrol engines were incredibly inefficient. Yeah, you look now at the efficiency of the burning of oil and gas. Yeah, it's much more efficient now than it was 100 years ago. Yeah, we take more from it. We get better use of it. Yeah, now we know for a fact that that's the way that technology develops. Yeah, if you look at computers back in the 60s, like, you know, they filled the room. Yeah, now you can put it on a phone, basically, what you had in the whole room, you know, 50 years ago. Yeah, that's what's going to happen with carbon capture and storage, with all of the alternative energy sources. Solar power is already becoming more sufficient. They're finding ways to develop better cell and capture on that. Like, so these renewables and the alternative energy sources, they will get more efficient. They will become more cost effective. But you're always going to need oil and gas to fill that gap. And it's not just about energy. We have to remember that, going back to Dave's point, it's about cheap energy. 90% of the world's population wants cheap energy. And most of them, they're more bothered about the food they're putting in their mouth than anything else. They want cheap energy. And they don't care if it's coal, they don't care if it's oil, and they don't care if it's gas. So if alternative isn't cheap, it's not going to get used.
And it has to be transmissible. If you can't transmit it,
yes, indeed.
If you don't have the power lines, if you don't have whatever it might be to transmit it, it's of no use to anyone. Whether it comes from hydrogen or solar or wind, if you can't transmit it,
indeed, yeah. I think it's a real, it's a big reflections of, the energy landscape and how that's going to affect our life, our lifestyle for the next, 30, 40 years. Okay, so we're going to go into another poll. It's coming up shortly. So what is stopping the transition to renewable energy? Is it the technology that still need advancing? Is it the infrastructures? Is it other challenges that's facing by different departments? Not able to make choices at the right time. Okay, again, a very balanced or very undecided response.
I think it is a little bit of both, bit all three. I think to some extent, yeah. I think the landscape of renewable energy will look completely different in 10 or 20 years time. Yeah. And then we'll all be wondering why we were even having these conversations. Yeah. We'll look back and go, oh, it was so primitive then. I just think, as I said earlier, I think we should have started earlier. We should have recognized the writing on the wall with climate change, and that we should have been making more transitional efforts, 20 or 30 years ago. If we'd started that transition back when we first started having the signs, I think we'd be in a much better place. Also, I think it's quite ironic that Greenpeace fought so hard, tooth and nail, against the nuclear industry, and now they're starting to wake up to the fact that actually they probably should have been supporting it a lot more, and we would have had a lot more nuclear power stations. You just need to look at France, for example. They've got lots of cheap energy, basically, and it's nearly all nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay, yep. All right. I think we have just time for one last question. And the question is actually quite relevant to our regions. So, do you think is there a difference in terms of the implementations of energy transitions in Asia and also across the different regions, around the world?
I'll start this off, and then Graeme's brain will start to kick into gear. And I think there has to be a difference. No matter what you say, there are cultural needs, there are geographical needs, and things like that. So people in small nations in the South Pacific are going to be different to people who are, say, in Malaysia or Thailand or Vietnam. India is still going to be a big thing, Europe. So the implementation is going to have to suit a bunch of not just physical things, distances, locations, but it's also going to have to fit the cultures and also the political regimes that, some are corrupt, some are less corrupt, some are more corrupt, but they're all corrupt to certain levels who are involved in this. We can't say that I have a thing that I don't like politicians and I don't like politics, and they're all corrupt. So once they get their finger in the pie, it's all about gaining as much taxes and things to run their show from the implementation of energy. And it's always going to be a case of when we change the energy focus, the government is going to want their cut. We have excise and that on our fuel and gas at the moment in Australia. But then we're looking at other things like, and I'll quickly end on this point, Australia is building a huge solar farm in outback Australia where they get 362 days a year of sunshine, and they're running a cable to Singapore, and they're going to be able to transmit huge amounts of electricity to Singapore and to Asia. So these things are already being looked at, but you never hear about it. That's one thing that can be done. So that's my take on it. There is a difference depending on the region and the end user. The end user just wants to receive it, and they want to receive it, as Graeme said, cheaply. They want reliability, continuity, and cheap.
I guess I would go along with that mostly. I think it is essentially down to politics to some extent. As the old joke goes, how can you tell when a politician is lying? The answer is his lips move.
Yeah.
So I guess I think there's a moral dimension to a lot of this. Like, I think the Western industries, or rather the G7 that have benefited from the early stages of the oil and gas industry and built their industries around cheap energy. I think they have to recognize that places like China and India are not going to stunt their growth in order to let the West maintain their advantage. That's patently unfair. And I think that the Western world will have to bear the brunt of energy transition if they want to hold any kind of moral high ground. And I suspect they won't do that. They will do only what is good for them. They're not going to let their economies suffer in order to let China and Asia, the rest of Asia, advance. So I am a little bit cynical about this. That's why I say I think it's going to take longer than a lot of people would like. I think we're in trouble with our whole climate change philosophy. And unless we can get a grip on it around the world and the politicians can actually start really talking about it, I'm not particularly optimistic that it's going to happen in a way that should happen at a speed that will, regardless of where the region is in the world, which region of the world. I think basically the West is not going to do as much as it should do.
Yeah, agreed. And I have one big concern that energy transition and energy transmission does not become weaponized, used as, which we're starting to see hints of right now, that the transfer of energy and the supply of energy can be used against another group of people.
Okay, thank you for the response, and I think that will be the last of the topics that we are in now on the topics. Just before we go, I would also like to make some announcement. Is that Invigour Energy will be participating in the Oil and Gas Asia exhibitions, OGA, in this upcoming 13 to 15 September in Kuala Lumpur Convention Center. So please do join us for those of you who happens to be in Kuala Lumpur, and we will be at Hall 1 in booth number 1111. Easy to remember.
That's easy to remember.
Yeah. So and just before you leave, at the end of this webinar, there is actually a feedback form. And we really value your feedback. So please take your time to make sure that you actually give that, feedback. All right. Okay. So again, I would like to thank everyone for your questions. I think that has, that have really made, this talk very interesting and very, high quality question has been asked and also answered by both Graeme and David. All right. So, okay. So I would like to thank our speakers, Graeme, Ray and David Lee, for coming, for making your times. I know that you guys are very busy, in your retirement and still making your time.
I wasn't doing anything else.
To give back to society. I think, on behalf of the, of the floor, I would like to again thank you, for your times and also sharing your invaluable, experience, that many of the young people will never have the chance to have, so again, thank you very much for that and coming to this talk. We do look forward that we will be having more and more, such talk in the futures.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before you go, there was a question you asked back earlier where the answer was yes or no, and very quickly, you're asked, was this the job you wanted to do when you were a child? What was the quick answer for Graeme?
No. I wanted to be a vet.
Okay.
But I have to say I got a summer job with Shell when I was doing my degree, and it changed my life completely. I just thought, this is what I want to do. I knew it at that point. Like I've said it before, but I kept myself extremely lucky that I've had a career doing. I've made quite a lot of money being paid well for a job that I really enjoy. It doesn't really get much better than that, to be honest.
Yeah, you look a bit like Noel Fitzpatrick. Anyway, that's the super vet for people who don't know. Yeah, well, very quickly, I'll tell you that when I turned 50, and became really, really involved in artificial lift. That was when it became my dream job, and I really loved everything I did and teaching and meeting all the people. But the one thing I've always wanted to be, and if I get reincarnated, I want to come back as a rescue and medical helicopter pilot.
Ooh.
That's what I want to be. I've always wanted
Wow.
to be a rescue or medical helicopter pilot.
I think
That's very specific.
I think if I get another chance, I'll be a vet.
Yeah.
Yeah, not come back.
No,
as a
actually,
gold.
if I come back, I will probably be a PT again. I really have enjoyed my job and my career. I got a kick out of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thierry, what did you want to be?
No, I must say, I really enjoy being a PT, being a petrol engineer. But strangely, that wasn't my initial thoughts of what I want to be. I think at one point I did think about becoming a doctor. Actually, it's quite a scary thought, thinking back now. But I wasn't given a choice. I got the Shell scholarships and basically been told that this is what you would do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might think about being a geologist. I never used to think about it or want to be, but I've worked with some really good geologists over my time, and they really opened my eyes to the artistry of it.
Yeah.
I quite enjoy the idea of conceptualizing how things developed, rather than actually having to simulate them or model them.
Okay, well, that answered that. Good.
Okay. All right. Again, I would like to thank all the participants who made the time to come in and listen to our talks, and also contribute to the questions. Very, very good quality questions, very interesting. And yes, we will hope to be able to redo this again in the future. So please do look out for our future roundtable talks again. And I would like to thank you all, and have a good day, and hope to see you again very soon in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Travel
everyone.
safe and stay safe.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye. Take care.
Okay.
All right.
We
That was quite good. I thought we went through that quite surprisingly, it was quite quite smooth here.
Yeah,
still
quite a few of the people hung in there.
are we still got participants? Are we still live?
No, I think they stopped the recording.